Welcome to SHOWstudio. It's Paris Fashion Week, and live from London, we're going to be unpicking the shows and what's been happening over on the runways. Today, we're going to be talking about Y Project. We've never done a Y Project panel before, so it's quite interesting to get some expert opinions on what the label's doing. There's been some quite interesting pieces that have come out in the last few days that maybe some of our viewers have seen about sort of the buzz around the brand, and they've sort of got an incredible number of stockists. I think in 2013 they had like 12 and now they've got 150. So it's a brand that's going through sort of a great deal of, there's a lot of excitement around it, and there've been some interesting articles about how that buzz is going to be maintained and why there's such enthusiasm around it, etc., etc. But before we sort of jump into our analysis of their most recent collection and what's going on at the brand in general, I will let my fabulous set of panellists, who are sitting very comfortably on this lovely, comfortable scaffolding, introduce themselves, starting with you, Belle.
Hi, I'm Belle Jacobs, and I'm a fashion writer and blogger.
Hi, I'm Harry Fisher. I'm the senior buyer at Machine A.
Hello, I'm Caryn Franklin. I call myself a disruptive fashion lover, and I'm Professor of Diversity at Kingston.
And I'm Rob Nowill, and I'm a writer and consultant.
And Lou Stoppard's long-suffering flatmate.
You can do that every time I come on one of these.
Yes, I am. Because I know how much you hate it. You're like... Caryn, I want to go to you first because I'm interested in, this is kind of related to Y Project and kind of not, but I'm interested in this idea of like the enthusiasm around sort of things that are seen as like cult or niche, and it feels like there's a real appetite for that at the moment, particularly, I mean, I've noticed it in terms of fashion, some of the brands that people are interested in, but particularly also in like publishing, you know, seeing loads and loads of small magazines coming out, you know, there's this interest again in like people, you know, the face being revived, all of that, and I know sort of going back to your history with ID magazine and what have you, what is this interest in sort of, because often it feels like sort of marketed individuality, where it's not really sort of things that are cult, but it's things that are presented as being sort of cult or niche. And where does that all, I know that's a really big question. Good morning.
How long you got?
But I'm just interested, because I was thinking about that a lot to do with Y Project, is this sort of sense of something being underground and this enthusiasm for that, and why that is the case.
Well, I think every era wants a countercultural movement. You know, we have been sort of herded towards mainstream expression because everything is blurred. When I began 35 years ago at ID, there was very definitely populist thinking, populist promotion of fashion, and then there was street fashion, alternative, you know, emerging designer fashion, and the two were poles apart, and there was a big gap in the middle, and the corporatization of creativity and of kind of fashion ingenuity has meant that we're really seeking something that has a more niche meaning for us, as opposed to a sort of homogenized, mass-produced meaning. So I personally am really excited that, you know, again, in the cycle of things, we're seeing a moment where there's a much more meaningful promotion of identity politics, you know, interaction of the product with the end user, and people wanting to have that experience shaped for them, as opposed to buying into the big mass-produced sell.
That's kind of the whole experience of Machine A slightly, isn't it? It's like when people go into Machine A, it's all about, it's not being this sort of like big corporate store, and there's that very sort of, you know, and Y Project is one of your brands, like...
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think that Y Project especially, I mean, they have like this kind of youth culture kind of thing, but also there's so much history you can see like in the collections, like he's referencing a lot of like Gothic kind of things. And in the store, we like obviously represent that really well with the pieces there, so you have to like put them together and make them and stuff. But I think that there is like a kind of cult following with it, but it's not huge. I see that it's really elegant and not so like, it's not so streetwear based and not so like, there is that in that bit of 90s kind of rave culture, but not so much of it. And
who buys it? Is it a whole mix?
You know what, it's not like a big, like I said, like it's not like, I think with some brands you have like this very typical like cult following, but they have such a broad like client that comes for it. I mean, we have people that come into the shop, they don't even know the brand, and they ask about it and they're like, oh, I want to buy that. And then we have also people that coming in to see Y Project, people calling up and asking for the detachable jeans. So it's a real kind of broad mix of people.
That's interesting. You were nodding along to a lot of Caryn's points.
I
Give
mean,
me your
Yeah, my
take.
overview. I mean, I definitely think there's a massive reaction to, it seems like since the 80s there's been sort of the dominance of the sort of multinational, the corporate vision, the uniform vision. And I think people are so bored of that and really reacting against that. So I think the niche label comes up in response to that and has a lot of power. I wonder also, though, if the pace for them will be driven faster. So I think they'll maintain cult status, but how long will they maintain it for? I think there's always something new on the horizon. There's always, and also sort of thinking about what you were saying as well, that there's such a diversity of audience for Y Project. You know, I think it was, there's no longer tribes, isn't it? We all feel we can access a little bit of everything to express our individuality, which I think is a great urge. Yeah, so it's great, I think, the sort of the rise of the niche label.
But are you, sorry, go ahead.
I think the good thing about Y Project is that they have this broad following, so it's not just a cult following, which means that hopefully the brand has like more longevity, I think, in the long run.
Yeah, because do you, sorry, go.
I was going to
go.
say,
I'm
I
like
wonder
really
as well
loud today.
How niche anything can ever be anymore. I was just thinking that
True.
although we think Y Project's niche and it's cult and it's underground, like, you know, like that brand gets one outfit on Rihanna and it's going all over the whole world on social
It's
media.
kind of part of a club of brands.
And it's the same with everything. You know, you can make one collection in your basement, but if Kim Kardashian decides to go into a shop, suddenly it's the whole world knows what it is. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's like, I don't even know if you can be a niche brand anymore, really.
Yeah.
Well, it's about the veneer of niche, isn't it? So
Yeah.
it's like, even though Y Project has been worn by like Gigi Hadid and Rihanna, as you say, like there is this sense of it being underground. But that's about speed of communication, isn't it? Like how fast someone can become aware of something is very different to, I imagine, what some of the more cult brands, you know, that you were referring to during sort of those ID days, where it was actually word of mouth, whereas this is like word of Instagram.
And I think veneer is a really interesting word because I think
Yeah,
they're
veneer.
all playing on the kind of 90s underground look. So you kind of assume, kind of get tricked almost into thinking that they are underground. But you know, Y Project has advertising campaigns in magazines, and it, you know, has a huge following, as you said.
It has like a 5 million turnover, I think,
Huge
as well,
turnover,
which is
isn't
quite.
it? It's been
Yeah,
around
so
for a
that's
long
not,
time.
yeah, that's not.
But I think there's also a level of integrity from the designer, from the kind of intentions for what the clothing and the brand can represent and can hold for people. So I really enjoyed sort of reading when I was researching to sort of know a little bit more about the you know, there being an kind of embracing gender fluid kind of promotion of clothing. So Glenn, having worked with Jean-Paul Gaultier, and of course he was doing, you know, men's skirts in the mid-80s. So, you know, picking up on those things, which for me is really, really exciting. Caring about what it is to be human and what we feel about ourselves when we put clothes on, as opposed to, these are all the trend features. Everything that you bought into last year is just, we're so over it and we need you to buy a whole load of new things. And so we've got this reaction and these embellishments to make it look different. And that's why you should buy into it, because a load of celebrities are wearing it, because we've given it to them for free. Whereas there's intention behind there and much more sort of politicised and heartfelt understanding of why we're attracted to clothing in the first place.
It's in that you mentioned, so the designer, Glenn Martins, just for the sake of our viewers, the Y Project, the founder of Y Project very sadly passed away, and Glenn Martins has taken on the role as creative director, because I think sometimes I see articles and it almost implies like he's the founder and he's not, so just to clear that up for our viewers in case they're sort of confused by that. But it is interesting that you talk about that, because I've been thinking a lot about, going back to sort of what Rob was saying about these brands that seem cult, and I think, you know, a way of appearing to be sort of a radical or underground brand is often to promote sort of gender fluidity, often to, you know, an interesting brand sort of around that, who I see sort of some parallels with Y Project, is Eckhouse Latte, which everyone's talking about at the moment. They just did the new A magazine, and, you know, they've done a lot of that sort of communication. But I was thinking, you know, in fashion, any time a brand plays with that within a collection, it's reported about as if they're being really radical. But then John Lewis have made their baby clothes gender neutral. So I was like, actually, it's not that niche and radical But I worry it's becoming another hook that fashion people are using to be like, look how edgy we are. We put a boy in a... I don't know, because it has filtered down to...
And it's become a bit fashionable now.
Yeah.
Talk about, obviously it's only a good thing. It's the same with, having a much more diverse casting. I don't necessarily believe these brands are doing it because it's what they think they should do. I think they're doing it because they think it will get them good press coverage. And you can certainly see some very big brands who for a very long time did not use black models, suddenly going, oh, we're going to do all black campaign and we're going to cast, we're going to street cast, and it feels very disingenuous. And I think the same can be true of, I don't necessarily think it's true with Y Project, because I think that's been part of the brand's DNA since before all of this had entered the kind of mainstream conversation.
But I do think that the end result is that we do have more diverse sort of beauty and body ideals on the catwalk and in our advertising campaign. And however they get there, that's all right by me.
Yeah.
Because to a certain extent, we are progressing, and those brands will no doubt be getting some kind of feedback and encouragement. What they can't do is go, we demand feedback this season and we want it to be reflected in our quarterly profit returns next season.
Yeah.
Because human beings don't work like that, and they would take exactly your position of, have you just adopted a gimmick because you think you should? So let me see, again, if your intentions are true and if you have integrity. Because if you're saying that you recognise your global market is, full of diverse people with, different individual beauty, and you want to reflect that, then I'm just going to watch how you're going to do that before I start spending my money to support you.
Yeah, and those things come out. I think I was looking at Gucci, the most recent collection pictures, and obviously they just did that all-black advertising campaign. And then this season, there's, I think, 3 black models on the catwalk. And it's hugely
a
white
gimmick.
Think, well, this was a gimmick, It obviously wasn't a truly creative decision by Alessandro that he wants to have a casting that's more reflective of...
And you see it, don't you, where people become like it's like the woke influencer, and it's like once you've become that person who's seen as being a sort of spokesperson for diverse, like you see it with every brand like using Adua at the moment, and it's not. It's kind of ironic that it's used as a representation of diversity, because it's the same person for every brand, and it's the same idea. And Adua comes from a very sort of privileged fashion background in a way. It's not like lots of different people with lots of diverse ideas are being spotlighted. It's the same. It's like every brand's like, oh, if we use her, we'll look like we're progressive.
We'll tick the box,
shorthand for
and
that.
that's the diversity stereotype covered. But actually, then you look at people who are managing it in a different way and bringing much more innovative debates. So Rick Owens has consistently kind of investigated a different way of showcasing humanity. I see Tatum Jones have got Kelly Knox, the model with the missing forearm, for a second season, and that's something that they want
used
to begin.
a model with a missing leg as well, didn't they?
Yeah, so he had a prosthetic. And to be able to say, actually, we've recognised that we can iconise and glamorise and, put, to a certain extent, cool status on bodies that traditionally have been seen as outsiders. And we want to bring those people in. We want to be inclusive because it is the individuality that excites us.
I think also it's like you have to look closely and see, like, do you actually believe what they're doing? And if they're doing that because they believe in it, or because they're doing it because they want us to believe something.
It's a big problem, though. It really worries me, actually, that I think, young people, like the commodification of like language of protest or the language of feminism or the language of diversity, and then it's being sold back to you like by a brand. It's like, buy this deodorant and you're a better feminist. Buy this.
I think people see through. I think if you look at the Kendall Jenner Pepsi explosion, people see through that.
They do.
It's obvious when it's not.
But I don't know if they do that. Yeah, it was like an absolute clanger. That was off the scale. But there've been very, very similar adverts.
Those Dior feminist T-shirts were worrying. Every magazine was saying, "Oh, this is a feminist thing."
Yeah, like no one looked at that and was like, oh, this is really bad. You see it all the time, like every brand is doing like a strong women thing, and people are fine. I mean, the Kendall one was just like peak to the point where you almost couldn't. But I do think it's slightly sort of it is slightly worrying, I think, in just in terms of sort of how young people understand what it is to be an individual. It's not through consumption, but
I do think there is a branch of young people, though, that are more aware of all the tricks in the games, and they are more sussed. I mean, they're exposed to a huge amount of information, and some of that's going to be distilled well. I mean, I'm quite hopeful about young people. I think the millennials have a lot of drive and force. They're seeing things that we never got to see when we were...
I know they get such a hard time, millennials.
Yeah, and they've got a hard time coming.
I know, but also everyone's like, oh, you're so vain, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, take too many selfies, but you guys ruined the economy, so fine.
And the planet.
But I do think there's consumption of product, but there's also consumption of intellect. And coming back to what, millennials are really having to work stuff out.
Yeah.
And it's messing with their minds, and it's messing with their self-esteem. And, more and more psychologists are looking at the effect of social comparison on, kind of in the digital world. And so beginning to be able to say things like, if people are only given the opportunity to compare upwards, it's bad for mental health. Whereas if you're given a broader range of body and beauty identity, and you can see where you fit in, within that spectrum, that's good for your mental health. And there are plenty of studies to show and to incentivize people who make product that when someone can see shared characteristics between themselves and a model, they show a 300% increased intention to purchase. So there's good reasons for us to be
But do you think part of the problem, like just sort of thinking back to Y Project, is one thing that slightly concerns me is you get brands like Y Project who pioneer these ideas, they're then used by bigger brands who see that they're working, and then in a way these brands can't sustain the sort of the hype or the interest around them because they become, successful for doing this particular type of casting or this particular sort of aesthetic or even this particular type of sort of communication, digital communication or what have you, and then bigger brands see it, co-opt it. And
I still go back
so
to the consumer being, clever enough to know where the integrity and the authenticity is, and that becomes the saleable, aspect. That becomes the kind of brand capital in a way, because we can see when someone's gone, oh right, everyone's talking about this, let's do this. And there will always be a kind of popularist audience who will want that and won't be able to afford or engage with something that's more niche. But I would never, I would always feel that those brands who started something are still holding the way forward, because as they evolve and they develop, they move forward into other territory.
And what are brands that have managed to do that successfully? So who've been like a cult brand that has transitioned, like everyone would talk about Com as quite an interesting example of that, but are there brands that we would like to, that you think, their path would be a good path for sort of Y Project to follow, or do we think that the industry's changed too much for sort of that to...
Are we talking about brands that sort of maintain their integrity?
Yeah,
over a long
maintain
period
a
of time?
sense of who they were when they started.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Margiela feels true to itself.
Yeah, and I mean, I would obviously on a broader level, I would point at a vehicle like ID that has obviously had to change over 35 years to accommodate the way that the market, the turbulence of the hard copy market and digital kind of what is it? It's a phenomenon, But you still, if you've got something that you hold true at your heart, you go on a journey with it.
I think that it's about starting with something that is kind of key to a brand, and then things will change around that, but then you always kind of keep that kind of same style at, like as you said, like at heart.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people, they do, a lot of brands, they have something and then it completely changes.
Yeah.
So
And I
it
think,
depends.
and the reason it changes as well is when your sense of brand is changing something in order to up sales and make a greater profit. I think for me that's the most soul-destroying move when a brand does that.
It's nice to see like a collection developing over seasons rather than immediately change. I find that a bit.
So, so Rick Owens, that's another brand that's, I really, really
Absolutely.
respect.
Yeah.
But often it's brands that aren't afraid to redo the same ideas,
Yes.
because that's quite a big problem, I think, where you know, a lot of brands get criticised for sort of doing the same thing again and again and again. They say it looks like every season, but that's kind of...
I think it's like you have to keep the, I mean, for instance, like J.W. Anderson has like a very distinct style, but it's not like regurgitated the same thing over and over again. It's just like that style that you can see.
So how would we summarise the Y Project style?
I think that he's really inspired by like this Gothic kind of thing, and there's also lots of like notes of history in there, but also it is influenced by this kind of 90s rave culture as well. But I think it's changing like a lot. You can see it's really elegant in there. There's some really like amazing dresses and stuff in there, but also he's also keeping the tracksuits and the hoodies, but working on them with the ruffles and things like that.
So it's kind of that merging of very street things with sort of like nods to historical dress.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting with Y Project, because Y Project is one of those ones, you know, when like the Daily Mail or whatever does those, who would wear this? And they did it with like the really long sleeves and the jeans, which I
It's like in a meme always.
Yeah, it's always in a meme, but it is quite
But I did look at that piece and I would go, who's going to buy that and how would you wear it?
Yeah.
I mean, have you got it?
We did have those pieces, and you really have to like kind of almost like
really have to take them to a tailor.
If a customer doesn't know how it's worn, you really have to like kind of show them.
Yeah.
Because actually, when you put the jeans on and the jackets on,
so you literally just bunch it up.
Yeah, it seems like quite daunting to put it on, but once you do and you have it on, it does stay on. It doesn't drag on the floor. Like I've seen jeans that are like this wide and they're just getting completely ruined. But these ones, the bottom is not that wide. So once you have them on, it's just really ruffled up. So it is fine.
They do look quite cool when people wear them. They just look really silly on like when you take a picture like the day.
Yeah, and the arm is like 3 times as long.
That was one of the pieces where I thought, I'll never buy that. It's £450 and I can't have it. But I also really respected the vision because I like designers that distort your perception of your body, you know, and offer something else. There's something very playful about that. But it was for me a piece that you look at rather than you purchase and you use.
And it's interesting that they're sort of messing around with. I think that's actually what I find the most interesting about also like sort of peer brands like Vetements and stuff. It's interesting to have people playing around with shape when it felt like for a long time fashion had just got really surface. It was all about like what graphics you were doing or what logos you were doing. And yes, it can feel a bit silly sometimes when it's like a sleeve that's like, you know, 8 foot long or what have you, but it is interesting. Like I do think, you know, Vet won't get a lot of stick for like just making hoodies or whatever, but some of those shapes that they made and the way they make your body look when you're wearing them are really, really fascinating. And I think it's quite clever to have sort of brought that.
But it's another way that sort of designers like Vetements challenge, I was going to use the word hegemony, but challenge sort of the way we perceive things should look. So very traditional notions of beauty, very traditional notions of what a body should look like.
Yeah, and how a woman should stand or how a man should stand. Yeah, it's interesting.
Which then goes into how we perceive women as opposed to men. So it really is. It goes very deep in some ways.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, if you said how would you define what Y Project stand for or what they're about, you know, and other people like that, there's an attitude, there's a countercultural energy that is politicised, that is around identity politics, that is exciting. And so many of the bigger brands are really just churning out the marketing proposal in a sort of catwalk look that sells, you know, the hosiery, the eyewear, the luggage. And I wonder whether that it's, you know, you talked about can they sustain it in this market, you know, but us being able to redefine opportunities and sort of the market in such a way that this force that says you must expand, you must create new stories every season for designers, for journalists, so that they feel they've got a new story, so that stockists feel that you're bringing press to their door because you've been featured. And of course you can't sustain that. You can't keep being so reactive and so press-worthy.
In fact, when you talk about it, it just feels like a really old way of doing things now. It just feels...
I don't feel that every brand needs to sustain itself for 30 years either. Maybe, you know, I don't think it's a failure if a brand only exists for 5 years, but it does great work and produces, you know, really credible product and then ends and moves on to something else.
We'll look at someone like Christian Lacroix. Like, I think that he's a really interesting example of that. Or even like, I always say that like, Gareth Pugh does not get enough credit for being someone who's worked like that, because Gareth like has never sort of, you know, operated within the mainstream and has also found a really interesting way of continuing to do what he feels, you know, is sort of authentic to him, but has made this path in fashion through doing interesting collaborations, whether it's, you know, with costume or with filmmakers. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So you think sometimes, you know, if these brands aren't selling enough clothes in stockists, it doesn't mean that they can't still make fashion and communicate about fashion. You know, maybe it is that they work on commission for, you know, within the world of costume, what have you. I think that is quite interesting. It's like ideas of success. But I was going to ask, just before we have a look at the show, just sort of one last point, which is we were talking about this sort of cult thing around brands. And one thing that I will never quite understand is if brands are truly sort of so cult, is like, why do they feel this need to present at Fashion Week and on the Fashion Week schedule? Like, I had this actually, so I did a talk over London Fashion Week with Virgil Abloh, who does Off-White. You can watch it on SHOWstudio, actually. So it's me, Virgil, and Kim Jones from Vetements. And he was talking about, you know, how he felt in many ways the fashion system was closed off to people like him and sort of kids who are interested in his work. And he talks a bit about it in terms of race, but also in terms of sort of what he actually makes in streetwear. And he was saying, you know, there should be a fashion week for streetwear. Imagine if we set that up, blah, 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 blah. And afterwards, a journalist said to me, oh, I thought it would look really confrontational, but I really wanted to ask him, so why did you do it? Why did you show as part of Paris Fashion Week? And I understand that. I think it's important that he has, because it's broken sort of down barriers for other people. But I also get the point in a way. It's like, why, if you want to sort of oppose the system, why go into the system?
But then you'd be someone outside of the system, and to a certain extent, you know, I often say to people, if I'm pro-social fashion and I'm anti a sort of an oppressive normalising of an unachievable body, why am I working in fashion? Because if I'm outside of it, I'm a woman with a banner, just saying, well, I feel this. But if I'm inside it, I'm moving with it and changing it.
And changing it from the inside as well. I mean, didn't Vetements shift one of they've shifted schedules, haven't they? So and I think also on London Fashion Week, I mean, designers are finding new ways to present their collections outside of the sort of big tent. And I think you're right, working from within is actually much more powerful than standing on the outside.
And fashion's really easy to criticise from the outside, isn't it? It's very, very easy to be like, look at all these silly women and thin people. But like, actually, if you're in it, trying to do something,
you realise the complexities.
Yeah.
Do you know what? For me, there's a bit of an elephant in the room. I keep wanting to say it, and I'm not sure, but it's the pricing. And you know, Vetements, it's still very exclusive stuff. And I think, you know, most of the people I know can't afford this stuff. So even though you get people like Demna saying, my clothes are for the people, I don't want to, you know, they're not. They're not. And then, so I don't know how you get around that. Obviously, they need to make their money in order to survive. How do you, I can't rationalise that. It's prohibitively.
But that's what's really the problem for lots of young brands as well, where they can't sell to their audience because their audience can't afford it, but they can't make it any cheaper because otherwise they won't make any money. So it's like this kind of vicious cycle slightly. And I don't know what the answer is. It's kind of actually the same conundrum as with thin models, which is the sense of young brands going, well, we don't want to use thin models, but we can't afford to produce samples in multiple sizes. So that's why it's like often there are these quite boring factors that actually stop progressive things from happening. And I think, you know, cost is like the biggest thing, isn't it? But you must feel like, since from when you started All Walks, you must feel like a huge shift in change in the kind of bodies that you see on runways now.
I'm just thrilled that there is.
It's been a lovely time.
That there's just a sort of opening of the doors, and we're all sort of asking questions of ourselves. Who am I? What am I about? What do I believe in? And, you know, as I was saying, who would have thought the whole kind of gender spectrum debate would have kicked off only a few years ago and had such mainstream kind of purchase. I am just thrilled about it because, and ultimately, in a climate now where there's so much conformist politics, and you know, we have to look to the liberal arts, to young creatives, to be holding that countercultural position, to say, you're not defining me, I'm not, you know, agreeing with this populist way of doing things. So
But that's why I go back to the John Lewis thing, because I genuinely think that is like really fascinating. Because you said, you know, young creatives, and it's this idea that these ideas are somehow niche, but like I would see like John Lewis in some ways as like a bastion of conservatism, and the fact that they have like I think it shows actually these ideas are not as like edgy as we think. You know,
But I was thinking more of Trump's America, in which, you know, all of the repeals that are going on are all about diminishing the rights of individuals who could be termed outsiders, even women, you know, so that, you know, they are forging a path. But I did like that. Of really conformist thinking. I don't mind if Trump suddenly decides to get on the gender spectrum bandwagon and start making, you know, opening up. So I don't mind that John Lewis is opening up.
No, I think it's amazing that
Yeah,
they did it. I think it's
fantastic.
amazing.
Yeah.
And I think it's fascinating that it's like baby clothes. But I think it shows, you know, like how quickly that conversation has moved, that is now kind of quite a normal
It
thing.
shows how it is filtering down and how quickly
It
has
does.
filtered down,
Yeah.
especially into like baby clothes.
I think
Yeah,
it's I mean,
yeah.
my daughter's now 8, but when she was 3 or 4, you start shopping for her and you just think, oh my God, all the girls' T-shirts have got My Little Pony on them,
Yeah.
or some kind of cute kitty, or some kind of watered-down feminist
like
statement,
social
like
butterfly
girls
or
do it.
something.
And then on the boys' side, it's all and it was just the most. I was a very anti-pink mum. Trying to reintroduce pink actually because it has something to say as
You're
well.
like, it's cool now.
Yeah, she's going, no. Yeah. But, I couldn't find options for her. And increasingly, I would drift over to the boys' sections. And there she'd get great trousers that she could really run around in, and just a navy blue T-shirt that didn't have a cat on it. And so it's been happening for a while, and I think it's fantastic that, whether it's niche or not, I don't care. It needed to happen, really.
And also, like, I think it's also part of, like, people having, like, a few children or something, and they're like, they can't afford necessarily to keep buying new stuff over and over again, so now they don't necessarily have to.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can, I think that is an interesting point, that notion of like sharing and not being so.
Also,
you
wasn't
decide
there,
this for this person. This
there was that Clark's shoes. Did you hear about that?
Oh yeah,
as
where they
well?
did a shoe called Dollybird. For
Yeah,
like
Dollybird.
6-year-olds.
So, did you hear about this? Almost exactly the same shoe for 2 sexes.
Yeah.
Boy and girl. And the boys was called Leader, and the girls was called Dollybird.
That sounds like something out of the Jimmy Savile era.
You were just like, who are these people? Like, I know, it's
I think they were
ridiculous.
so embarrassed after that, though.
I think that, you would be, wouldn't you? Should we have a look at the show?
I'd actually forgotten we were to do
I know. Let's have a look. So, I have the press release. Continues the evolution of the Y Project Home Collection, ascending towards the fine balance between the easy, wearable, and strong statement pieces. Oh, God, it's kind of all typical press release stuff. It's very much about a continuation. Key pieces: organza enwrapped jeans, sweatshirt, leggings, Swarovski pearl embroidered bodysuits and knitwear, floral printed drawstring multi-pleat dresses, spiraling thigh high heels with flowers, slouchy boots, extra large spiral pearl earrings and necklaces. It's more girly than I would expect.
It's definitely like really, I think that it's really moved into like this really elegant kind of brand, and I think, like I said before, there's a lot of like, I mean, in the first look we see like this kind of power shoulder jacket with this floral print, and it's really like, it's a really powerful collection. I think it's really elegant.
Well, I think for a lot of people think of Y Project as like kind of slouchy sportswear, and it's interesting that it's gone more into this sort of, like power dressing kind of like thing, where it's a bit more sort of done up and what have you. Can we keep seeing looks, Britt? Britt's gone to sleep.
I like the sort of kind of awkwardness of where there is, it looks like the sort of, almost like the sports shirt with a floral skirt. And I think that kind of juxtaposition, self-styling, putting it together as it pleases you, for me that's always inspiring. I always enjoy that. And I think if you work in fashion, you kind of take it for granted that that's an easy thing to do. But people who haven't grown up or who haven't had a training that allows them to think about proportion and cut and balance find those looks harder.
But then it's quite funny now because of this sort of vogue for dressing like that. Like sometimes I'm in the street and you're looking at someone and you can't work out whether they're like really, really badly dressed or like really cool. Do you ever have that? When you're on the tube and you're like, are you like a massive, massive nerd who's studying like further maths PhD, or are you like on your way to the Vetements show? Because everyone's wearing like big dad trainers and like weird trousers. And, like,
I really like this. I think it's look 6, the one in the middle here. It's with the cardigan and the kind of horizontal stripes. It's really like kind of 80s kind of, you know, and the collars from the polos. I think it's a really interesting like move actually.
Well, it's these interesting little details, you know, a collar being slightly too big or something like slightly falling off that I think makes it really, really strong.
And they always sort of skirt around what's vulgar as well, which I think is always the most interesting kind of clothes. Like those little sequin nipple covers.
Things,
I think they do it in a way that's actually slightly more intelligent and sophisticated than what Vetements does. It's always, you kind of get more the more you look at them, and sometimes Vetements feels like one idea that's been stretched really, really, really thin. Whereas I think there's something slightly more intellectual about what Y Project does.
Can we go a bit faster? Are you okay?
Am I right? These trousers have been seen in other collections, haven't they?
This kind of style of like the ruffles and the like layered bits of the trousers, like this is something that is very like classic for them. They're doing it a lot. And it's something that is really, really popular with like the actual consumer as well.
I would just be scared to wear it.
Again, it's like actually trying it on and seeing it, I think. Although some of it does look quite crazy on.
But in a way, that's the most recognisable element. You know, if you're trying to make your money go far and you're trying to buy a piece of something that brings this whole Y Project world into your life, you'd opt for something like that because you know it's still a fairly normcore garment that you can put a variety of your own stuff. But and so for me, I think I really enjoy what they're doing with a utility item and just completely reinventing it.
The problem just goes back to what Belle was saying about this idea, though, of it being whenever you do something that riffs on the ordinary, people are then like, but it's like £800. You know, that's like the problem. Like that's, I think, the biggest criticism of Vetements is everyone's like, it's a hoodie and it's this, and this is within that same language of Vetements, I think. And
I mean, I think that's quite encouraging.
Sorry.
Well,
everyone's so British, you're like, no.
I mean, I think it's quite encouraging for self-invention, though, because I think you sort of look at it and you go, well, I can't afford that, but maybe I could buy an oversized hoodie.
It's
sort of try
you can get that style.
Yeah.
I think you can take, it's just something that hasn't happened for a long time in fashion, is that you can take the styling and that's kind of enough. Like everyone was cutting their hands off their jeans because of Vetements. So even if you couldn't afford
everyone can have that look.
The jean for £900, there is something democratic about it. And here you can buy a rugby shirt and wear it with a skirt, and actually it's probably cooler than buying the designer version.
But sorry to be retro and old school, but isn't there an opportunity for them to be, you know, I can only afford Anglomania, I can't afford Westwood Red Label. You know, for them to be doing something that still delivers what they're doing, but to undercut their own prices. You know.
Vetements did that with a T-shirt, didn't they do it with a staff T-shirt, which is a mere £150.
I see what you're saying.
But then it's interesting because brands are like closing off all their diffusion lines and stuff. But I don't know, it's hard, that contemporary market. It's like, some brands are good at doing that, I think, at going in at that like £400, £500 price point rather than the £1,200 price point. But I think it all depends on I mean, I don't know enough about their business model to understand this, but I think it just depends on your quantities and stuff, doesn't it? It's really, really hard.
It can be very diluting as well to buyers, I think. I mean, you'll know more than me, but I think, you know, when I was at matches, it was often the case that the younger line could cannibalise the main line because the ideas suddenly looked less interesting because they're having to be watered down and filtered down and filtered down. And then you get into huge quality issues as well, which is, as we were saying, if they could make their jean for £200, they'd make it for £200. And there's a sacrifice somewhere along the line, which normally means it's not a very nice fabric or it's made in Bangladesh in a factory. So it's difficult, I think.
What is their price point? How much are their jeans?
The jeans are about, I think, £400. So their price point is, I don't think it's like, I mean, maybe I'm deluded, but...
No, it's like,
you have to work with those prices every day.
Yeah, you know when you're in fashion, and you're like, it's only £600.
No, I think that it's not like, it's not ridiculous, and the stuff, the pieces they're selling are really like standout pieces, and I think that people don't come in and they're not like, oh my god, that's so expensive.
Yeah.
Because it's not just a plain printed T-shirt or something. There is like stuff going on with it, so I think it's worth it. And it's definitely not the most expensive.
The most expensive.
I think also as well when you're buying into something like that in the way in which this is presented, you're not buying it for a season. You're buying it to have longevity and to be part of what you want to say about yourself going forward for a long time.
Yeah.
And this Y project is not covering their clothes in logos. So these pieces, they're not covering their clothes in logos and things. So these pieces can be worn over and over again, and it not be like Vetements or.
I really like the little flower spirally thing. I think it's kind of
On the shoes, it's really
it's nice that I kind of like that really romantic thing.
It's really funny. I was thinking because the collection really. I mean, I don't know if anyone's. Obviously we go to their showroom in Paris, and the showroom is really like, it's so like this period kind of building. It's really like Tudor, and it literally goes with the collection so well. It's really nice.
But I like those historical elements. I think that feels kind of. I always loved that. I always thought that Nazir was so amazing at doing that. You know, taking something that's really sporty and then mixing it with like this sort of like, you know, big ruffle sort of sleeve. He pulled a lot from historical costume, and I think it's really interesting when people can do that really well. And there's such a climate of like looking to costume at the moment. If you look at like the, you know, everything that's going on at Gucci and what have you, it's all like stuff that looks a little bit like it's dressing up box costume clothes. It's interesting to see that sort of nodded to with this sort of
And it's
aesthetic.
also completely the flip side of what Vetements is offering and other labels like that. Just it's really different.
Because I do see how people compare them and stuff because of where the brand kind of came from. I mean, not originally, because obviously it changed so much, but there is pieces with that, you know, the long sleeves and things like that. But actually, when you look down to it, I think they're very different.
Because in the beginning, it was more sort of Rick Owens-y, I would say.
It was like
that
really
was Johan or Johan. Johan was originally quite minimal and black.
And he died, and then Glenn kind of took over, and his style was not that kind of minimalist, dark kind of Rick Owens style. So the brand has changed a lot, but
See-through here. I thought something I was going to ask and it was really good and I've forgotten it. It's really annoying me, but I can't remember what it is. Oh well. Keep looking.
It's really romantic.
That's made me feel better though, because I do that all the time.
No, it was really good. It was like someone said something and I was like, oh, I'm going to ask them about that, but I've like completely forgotten what it is. Oh, I was going to ask, we were talking about that notion of like mixing things up when you get dressed. And I just, one thing, the problem with that though is like brands create this look that's really eclectic, but then when stylists are given it to work on, they have to shoot it sort of full look anyway. So it's kind of a bit weird that, I agree with you, there's this sort of climate of like, you know, mix it up in any way you want to.
But then you can only shoot it like that.
Yeah, but you really see it, then it's on the cover of a magazine, it looks exactly the same. So, and I would imagine that people who are buying magazines, are the kind of, you know, to still go and pick up a print publication and spend that money, it tends to be because you are so interested in fashion that you'd love to get the eye of Katie England or, you know, whoever, and see how they do it differently. But those opportunities are going away now, which seems a shame when you've got these brands that are sort of quite eclectic. But I don't know, that kind of lack of freedom.
That's about maintaining, isn't it? The brands want one image, don't they?
Yeah.
They want that image consistently.
I think it was because
projected.
everyone's satirized. Saturized? Is that a word? Saturated?
Saturated.
Sorry. With imagery. So it's like, I think brands are just keen to get that one visual to cut through, because it is, it is hard. One question I also have, just this is a really boring business question, but so we were talking a lot about gender neutrality and brands sort of, you know, doing men's and women's that are sort of more similar. Men's has always been consistently so much cheaper than women's wear. Do we think because people are making stuff that's more neutral and in between, the price of men's is going to go up or the price of women's is going to go down? Like, I just don't know what...
I think one of the reasons why women's was always more expensive is because, as you said at the very start of this, in the last few years, women has been very ornamental. Like, it's been very embellished, very embroidered, very jazzy, lots of expensive fabrics, whereas men's, in its nature, is always humble fabrics and quite simple construction. So I think that if women's is coming closer to men's in terms of that, I would hope that it also means the prices of women's clothing will go down because everything's not covered in an ostrich feather. Yeah. Unless you're at Saint Laurent last night, in which case it is.
But what do you make of that, Harry?
But also, it's really interesting with Y Project is that I think that they began doing it showing in men's. But actually, I mean, I kind of see it as a women's collection that is unisex, so it kind of goes more to women's wear anyway. And I think that the price point across both women's and men's stays pretty similar.
And
our customers are buying men's for women's, women's for men's.
Yeah.
Because it's going to start at a different price point, I think, particularly within the women's wear, because you've got so used to having contemporary and then like high expensive stuff. Whereas these brands that their collections are all kind of the same, I think it is going to affect.
Yeah.
Because it is true, like men can buy clothes for so much cheaper than women
It's true,
can.
yeah.
And I just wonder what is going to happen if there's going to be a new sort of somewhere between sort of contemporary and high fashion for the brands like who are doing the sort of more mix
I
of
think
stuff.
like for menswear to like go up in price, you'd need to see a change in those pieces. Like with the pieces here that maybe like the purple polo that we can see there, maybe a man could wear that, but because of the stitching and the detailing on it, the prices like would be okay to pay for. Whereas if it was just a plain polo shirt, then you'd be surprised to see probably the same price.
Yeah.
There is also quite a weird sort of bar at which men just won't spend money anymore. You know, if you ask any buyer, they'll say that after a certain point, no matter how great the piece is, men aren't going to spend that much money on it. They're slightly more, I think because, you know, fashion is less intrinsic to a lot of men, they just won't go over that amount. Whereas women, not all women, some women, will spend, you know, that ridiculous Swarovski-covered YSL boot is however much hideous amount of money, but because it's a thing, women will just buy it.
Yeah.
You know as the buyer that you can buy 10 of those and you'll sell them. Whereas I think for men it is different. They just won't spend that money. So we kind of have to work within a certain constraint as designers that you can't let it get that expensive.
You can't go that much. It's interesting to see the close-ups because there's so many details that you just sort of don't notice on the...
Yeah, and also when you go to, like for instance, when I go to the showroom, is like a lot of these pieces they look like you think. I mean, there's like a zip-up fleece jacket actually in the collection somewhere near the beginning, and it looks like I saw it and I thought, oh, I really want that. But I know when I go to the showroom, it's going to be like really off the shoulder and too much for me to wear. Yeah, there's lots of like details you can see here on the polo that like there's so many different things that you don't see.
I like all this kind of sheer, roughly,
I really like this,
you know,
as well.
Anne Boleyn stuff that's going on. That's quite fun.
And the shoes and the boots are
16
amazing.
man.
16, no, I think it's a girl.
okay.
You never really know, which I think is quite cool. So what's next for Y Project? What do we want to see happen next? Because obviously they've gone through this like sort of huge jump in stockists and attention. What would be our advice for maintaining the hype and the buzz?
I would like them to keep developing this elegant style, and I think like people are kind of done with seeing like loads and loads of tracksuits and loads of hoodies, and here they've kind of minimalized that, and they're moving into this like really elegant style, and I think that's the way that they will go, and they should.
They should go that way. Yeah, it is interesting actually, that slight backlash towards things that, I think people are still playing with gender, but I think things that look so sort of like obviously gender neutral, like tracksuits and hoodies, people are slightly moving away from. Like it's quite interesting, you know, you mentioned that Gucci collection, but like everyone talked about gender neutrality in terms of Gucci, and now it's like the girls look super, super girly and the boys look super. So it's interesting slightly, like, you know, with this, like the big jewelry and all the ruffles, that it's a brand that we know to sort of be a part of that conversation, but they're not doing normcore style. What else what would you like to see happen for them to keep moving forward?
I mean, I feel like I would want them to connect with what it is that allows them to go forward with integrity, because there are always people looking to exploit and make money, and you know, we've seen so many great brands get investment and then be stretched and forced to investigate markets with, you know, uncharted markets with unsuitable product. And so, okay, change the product because we need to make this market over here. So you're doing this, but start working with sequins because we've just put a lot of money into you and we want you to go over here. And, you know, there's a naive part of me that says when someone's doing something great and, you know, they're satisfying a group of people and they stand for something, can they not be just left to do that instead of being forced into expansion and growth? And I know that's naive because capitalism doesn't work like that, but feeling somehow, right, now we've got to get an investor and now we've got to start doing our own luggage range and our own eyewear range, and suddenly, you know, the cash flow becomes stressful and the investors' demands become stressful. So I would just really hope that the brand itself can just hold on to its own sort of truth and core.
There are labels actually challenging that, though. I'm thinking of Katie Jones and another young designer called Mary Benson. They're just going, no, we don't need to grow.
Yeah,
we're just going to do what we love, and we're going to operate on a small scale. And obviously that's working very much counter to capitalism, but and its ways of working. But I find that really inspiring. That someone just goes, I just want to do what I love.
If you can make a living from what you love doing, why do you need to make a bigger living? You know, if you're happy with your audiences and you're making clothes.
But I do think people are asking that question more and more now.
Yeah.
Because this, you know, this endless desire for profit is taking us down.
And the ones who are right at the top aren't happy as well. You know, if I were a designer who was, you know, in that lucky privileged position where I was making clothes and people were buying them, why would you want to go and run a huge company and see all the horrible things that happen?
I think there's a perception that if you don't keep moving, then you die.
Yeah.
And
it's
I
not
think
necessarily
like
wrong. There's a lot of designers who, like sharks, like, you know, if you look at Amin Kirchhoff, or even I was looking at the Milan roundup and I was thinking of Stella Jean, who 2 years ago everyone was going, she's amazing, she's a big thing, all the stores wanted to do events with her, everyone was talking about her, everyone was wearing her to Fashion Week. Now you don't see her. She's been dropped by nearly every major store.
But I think that's one of the tricky spaces, isn't it? Is that the store says, bring me a new story and a load of press with it, because I'm stocking you and I want you to bring people to my door. And so everybody's asking the creative to do all this marketing through their own creativity. And that, you know, that's the sort of cog that we've gotten into. And it was really interesting reading just a little something on Armani, who is one of the very few brands, I think, who hasn't taken in investors. And I think he still owns all the shares in his company. And he did what he wanted to do.
Oh yeah, he's totally like
people were kind of
I'm going to do my awful veils and my 80s styling, and my models are going to spin halfway down the runway. That's what I'm going to do.
But there's an integrity.
Yeah, it's totally integrity.
To like, oh God, I've got to get into this because everyone's doing that.
It's not going, I need to suddenly.
You feel like you're in a time warp at Nowill, but in this amazing way where you're like, no, you will not move to pressure. Like, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
But how amazing that he's been able to hold on to his vision and his product and possibly his business and his sanity because he's done that.
But it's also speaking directly to your consumer. It's interesting that Stella Jean example you made is like, obviously there are some stockists who work really, really closely with brands and they, you know, really develop these quite important kind of mentoring relationships. But also brands need to be able to, they can't be too reliant on that, on like the kingmakers. They have to, in a way, have like a direct relationship with your audience, because if all your stockists turn around and drop you and you've got no way of actually knowing who was buying your stuff and you're not connected to them. So that's something that I always think, you know, with...
But you also need to be allowed to go in the wrong direction. I think that's the problem with a lot of, not all, you know, as you say, there are some stockists who are very supportive and work very much as partners with their brands, but you also see brands who do one duff season and they're dropped by everyone because they had a bad sell-through. And so the pressure on those designers, that's why they end up just regurgitating the same stuff and being like, oh, day dresses work, we'll do more day dresses. Oh, that heel work, we'll do that again in a snakeskin. You know, it's really an impediment to designers being able to push themselves and, you know, do the things which is why people are drawn to them in the first place.
I think if they can keep their aesthetic and then some seasons be like up there and then some seasons it not be so loud, it keeps you relevant for far more longer. If you're too loud and too in the press every season for 4 seasons, 5 seasons, then people get really bored of you.
And you get a backlash as well.
And that's exactly what happened.
Or you can even mix that. I mean, like they've done in one, you know, there's a lot of really wearable stuff here, really beautiful stuff, and also really quite out there stuff, no massively long sleeves, but he's mixed it up in this collection.
So we want a bit of change, but also more of the same. Really helpful, contradictory advice for him. Best of luck. Should we give him a round of applause for giving us so much to talk about and for a lovely collection?